Welcome to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's DIF, an interactive online event series that aims to shift mindsets and inspire action around the circular economy. My name is Seb, and I'm going to be hosting a special session for you this afternoon, the last one of our day of activity. We talk a lot about the circular economy here during the DIF and in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's work more broadly. But how do you get started in the conversation? How do you introduce the circular economy? Well, members of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation team today are going to give you 4 different ways. And after this initial break, it's going to be Ilma.
We need to start making more conscious material choices.
I set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.
Hello. So I have a story for you today. And this story relates to one of the everyday items that we all use in our lives. And yet it's so ingrained in our lives that we normally don't even pay attention to that. And that is an incandescent light bulb. And this is quite old and probably broken specimen, and probably the only thing I can do with it is to throw it away. And yet, a light bulb is one of the most commonly used visual tropes in our culture, and it represents the human ingenuity, new ideas, and whenever someone thinks of a solution to a problem, there is a light bulb appearing right over their heads, and the light bulb lights up. So the light bulb was initially invented at the beginning of the 19th century. And then throughout the century, it was being more and more developed. And by the end of it, it could last for almost 1,200 hours. And there was one particular company in a town called Shelby in Ohio, United States. And they created one particular item that was hand-blown with carbon filament. And then they installed one of these items in a small town in California called Livermore in their fire station. And that was in 1901. And until this day, that one particular light bulb continues to burn. And that is 118 years of almost non-stop burning and non-stop light. And if you think about it, it's more than 40,000 days, and it's more than 1 million hours. It's almost hard to comprehend. And yet, for the manufacturers of light bulbs, the longer span of a light bulb wasn't that great news. So when they gathered in a meeting in Geneva in 1924, they were discussing a serious threat to their industry. Because at the time, on average, the light bulb could last for about 2,500 hours. And that meant that their sales were going down and down. So they came to a collective decision to limit the lifespan of a light bulb to 1,000 hours. And after that meeting, the designers and engineers in each company went back to the lab and started working on the light bulb, how they can reduce its lifespan. And that was the first known case of the planned obsolescence, which is an intentional reduction of a lifespan of a product in order to drive its sales. And most importantly, that was representative of the economic system that we had in the day and that we still have in our world today. And this is the economic system which is based on the fact that the companies use the resources without thinking about that, then they turn them into items, then they try to sell more and more of them. And we buy these items, then we use them for a short period of time, and then we throw them away. So it's take, make, dispose, linear economy. And yet today we know that we can't sustain this economy within the planetary boundaries. So we need to rethink the way we do things. We need to use that human ingenuity and creativity to find different, more circular solutions. And what if, instead of trying to sell more and more of this, more and more of light bulbs, the companies sold light itself? And this is exactly what happened, and this is exactly an idea that an architect, Thomas Rau, had in mind when he was reinstalling his new office building in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. He didn't want to do anything with the light bulbs, light fittings, or even electricity. He knew that all he wanted was the performance. He wanted light as a service. So he approached Philips and told them exactly that. He told them precisely how many hours of light that he wanted to have in his office throughout the year. And he told them he didn't care about how to install it, maintain it, repair it. He just wanted life. And that's what Philips did. So they took into account the structure of the building. They took into account the height of the ceiling, the amount of daylight presence in the building, and they installed the intelligent lighting system that optimized the use of daylight, that had sensors and controllers to see if there is motion in the office so that they could adjust the light to dim it or brighten it up accordingly. And most importantly, Philips retained the ownership of all the fittings, of the light bulbs, of the lamps, and they could take it back at the end of the contract. They could then reuse it, refurbish it, or recycle it at the end of life. So as you see, a simple item, light bulb, and two completely different stories. So it's both a representation of the planned obsolescence and how we build in the limited lifespan into the products as part of our throwaway linear system. But at the same time, it's a representation of human ingenuity and creativity and different ways of doing things and finding ways to disrupt the current economic model with more circular solutions. So that was one way to present circular economy, and my colleague Seb will continue from here and give you another way of how to talk about circular economy.
My story is a story of an economy and a planet in crisis. An economy and a planet that can no longer work, the linear economy. And by a linear economy, I mean the way that the economy fundamentally works today. We take things out of the ground, we make something out of them, and ultimately waste them. And of course, the challenges of that model are seen at both ends of this linear line. At the end of finite resources and being dependent on fossil fuels, and at the end of the pipe where our landfills are frequently filling up and we're being forced to incinerate masses of material. And both from an economic perspective in terms of trying to squeeze more and more value out of that system, and from an environmental system where the toll of that model is increasingly evident and it's becoming obvious that we're struggling to live within our planetary boundaries, it's clear that it won't work in the long term. For plastics alone, we know that only 14% of that material is even collected for recycling. 2% is recycled to maintain that value, and that 30% or more than 30% ends up in the environment. In fact, our research suggests that by 2050, there could be more plastics than fish in the ocean. And of course, plastics, to go to the beginning of that line, are likely to represent more than 20% of oil production by 2050. This can't work in the long term, and that plastics is just one example. But in the fast-moving consumer goods sector as a whole, we know that of the $3.2 trillion of material value that's created annually, 2.7 trillion is wasted. It doesn't make sense. And we can look beyond fast-moving consumer goods and plastics in the world of food, where over 30% of food is wasted. Last night I had a conversation with an innovator, Tristram Stewart, who's devoted his life to trying to fight food waste. And that's 30% of food that is wasted, even in a world where millions of people suffer from starvation and malnutrition. And in a world where we know that our agricultural returns and farming practices are destroying the soil, and that we actually mainly have about 60 harvests left, 60 years left of topsoil. We're in a crisis and the economy cannot fundamentally work. And that's situated in a time, of course, where population is rapidly increasing. Last night at the Foundation Summit, Andrew Morley, the Foundation CEO, told a story that when he was a young man, there were about 3.3, he lived in a time of 3.3 billion people on the planet. Today there's 7.7 billion, and by 2050, that number's likely to rise to 10 billion, or predicted to rise to 10 billion. How do we meet the needs of this population, or this population growth, so that everyone can have healthy living standards, live within our planetary boundaries, and cut down on the damages that we're doing to the environment? And I've said all this and I haven't even mentioned the word climate change and how we mitigate some of the effects that we're having in terms of CO2 emissions and the effects on the atmosphere and temperature increases. It's clear, as Catherine Trebeck described just in our last session, that we have an economy that's fundamentally misaligned with the needs of today. So what does a different economy look like? And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ashima to tell you a different way of introducing the circular economy.
So, I think the easiest way to start explaining the circular economy is actually to look at what is going on in our linear economy today. That's the take, make, waste, dispose economy. If you think about it, there's obviously a lot of waste and pollution that's being created in our world today, but there's also a lot of stuff and products and resources that are going underutilized. So whether that is in our cities, we have 92% of the time our cars remain parked. They're actually not in use at all. In our offices, in Europe, we found that offices are actually not used 60% of the time, so office buildings are just staying unused. In our households, I think 80% of our household items are only used once a month, whether that's your drill or maybe clothes that you only wear once a month. And then at the end of the day, municipalities are spending more than up to 20% of their budgets on these sort of the waste that they have to deal with in cities. All of these are examples of underutilized assets, value that's going unused, money that's being left on the table, and all of this really represents a fantastic opportunity that we should be grabbing. I think a great example of this is in the food sector. Winnow, is a company that has developed a little application and a tablet that you can attach to commercial kitchen bins, as you can see in the slide behind me. In the food industry, in the hospitality industry on the whole, I think there's estimates of something like $100 billion worth of food that goes wasted. That is a lot of money, that's being left on the table. Winnow, going back to Winnow, they have created this application that can be attached to these kitchen bins, and they actually analyze the kinds of food waste that are being thrown away by chefs. So whether that's kind of carrot tops and peels or leftover bread, and it gives the kitchens and restaurants that these bins are in, it gives them sort of some information about the kinds of food that they're wasting, how much of it, how much money they're actually wasting, and that makes them a lot more aware of what's going on. Kitchens that are using this kind of technology have actually managed to save between 40% to 70% of the food waste and are now 50% more profitable in most cases. Think about that as sort of a business opportunity and the value that that's creating for these kitchens. All of those opportunities added up can lead to a circular economy really creating up to $1.8 trillion worth of opportunity for the economy. I'll now pass on to my colleague Colin, who will give you the final way to explain a circular economy.
Thanks, Ash. So that's 3 different ways we've heard how people could introduce a circular economy. I'm going to give you the 4th way that we're going to go through today. And my favourite way, which is by using the metaphor of living systems. Why do I do this? I do this because we talk about the circular economy as an example of a complex system. So if we're going to talk about systems, why don't we look to one that's particularly successful? I start a metaphor by talking about ants. There are more, or rather, the ants are all around us, but we don't always see them. But the biomass of ants is greater than the biomass of humans. But no one really says that ants are a problem. Well, unless they're in your house or they pay a trip to your picnic. Why aren't they a problem? Because they stick within the rules. They're system smart. What about this? Cherry blossom tree. Recently blossomed, and our streets were full of the blossoms that had fallen from the tree. Thanks to the process of evolution, these blossoms are distributive by design. So some of them will make their way to other locations where cherry blossom trees will be created as a result of them. But most of these blossoms will not go to propagating other cherry blossom trees. But no one says that's wasteful. No one says that's a problem. This kind of abundance is actually really smart. It's system smart. Cherry blossom trees stick to the rules. Now, under the ground, in the soil, something else is sticking to the rules. These are roots. These are special roots, though. These are the roots of mushrooms. What's going on here? They're transferring information. We've found out over the last few decades that there's a heck of a lot of communication going on underneath our feet. In fact, some wits have called this the wood wide web. Information is being transferred back and forward, as well as nutrients. So these mushrooms are the agent that helps this transfer take place. When these roots wither and die, that's not problematic either. They add something back into the system. Nature is collaborative, it seems. But the fact that nature is collaborative actually might be news to the gazelle that's being stalked by the lion. That gazelle could do with some of that collaboration. But even when the gazelle dies, something good comes off it, because that carcass feeds the soil, which feeds everything else. Sticks to the rules. What are those rules? Well, some of them are on the screen behind me. You can see them just now. Food, actually, waste is not part of living systems. Waste becomes food. Living systems are collaborative. They're distributed by design. And what we say at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is that we can develop an economic system that takes these rules that we understand from living systems and uses them within our economy to create something better, a regenerative economic system. So that's 4 different ways in which you could introduce the circular economy. And as we go into discussion about things now, please use the chat forums, please use #ThinkDiff to tell us what you think of these 4 different ways, and also to tell us how you might do this. But for now, it's over to Seb.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you very much, Ashma and Ilma. Hope you enjoyed our 4 ways to introduce circular economy. A bit of an experiment for us. Have we missed a way? Do you have a particular way of sharing the circular economy story? Let us know in that chat feature. Let us know what you thought about our 4 approaches. We're going to have a quick chat about that exercise, if I can call it that. Maybe something about audience. It feels like sometimes how you describe the circular economy really depends on who you're speaking to. Ilma, who do you think your story is for?
Well, I think that is the power of the story, that stories are something that unites us all. And I think the stories could be interweaved to any audience in any presentation. So even if it's the most business-like, where you need to use a lot of facts and numbers, you can still weave in the story. It can be a much shorter story for this more powerful effect to really touch not only the minds, but also the hearts of your audience.
So in some ways, the method that you deployed is that the topic might be the thing that is dictated by the audience.
Yes, but I think the method itself could be used in any approach to any audience.
And Ashma, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the opportunity-focused approach that I used is quite helpful when you're trying to avoid sort of the doom and gloom. You're trying to give people hope. I think
you're talking about my
possibly.
introduction.
No, but I think the opportunity piece really helps when you're talking to businesses, policymakers as well. Using a lot of those fact-based pieces of evidence is something that definitely appeals to those kinds of audiences. They want a positive story. They want evidence behind that. So I think that's the kind of audience that my story works for. But I can also see the storytelling being a really important part of that. And sometimes it really depends on the person. Someone might respond more to numbers. Someone might respond more to a story.
And actually, you all use the elements of stories. You had a bit of a story of the conversation you had yesterday, and you had a story of Winnow,
exactly.
and the entire elements of your metaphor approach. We had these stories as well. So
You're saying that your idea topped all of them. I think it's obvious that they're not often used in isolation, those approaches.
Yeah, exactly.
What are the key strengths of the way you introduced the circular economy, Colin?
Key strengths. I think it's relatable. So if you talk about living systems, and we all understand about ants and trees and things that we see around us, So we can all relate to how living systems work. We all intuitively understand them, even if we don't understand the nitty-gritty of it all. So the real strength is it helps to transfer a message about systems that work, and I think it effectively sets the scene for how one might mimic that in building up, in this case, a circular economy.
There was a point during your story where I thought I was in a David Attenborough documentary. It was so full of facts.
Yeah. Just adding to that, the sort of the statement that waste doesn't exist in nature was actually the way that I got convinced about circular economy. That was something just so powerful about that idea. And once I heard that, I was like, gosh, that's so obvious. Like, why does waste exist in human society? Why does it exist in our economy today when it doesn't exist in nature?
It's so simple, isn't
Yeah.
it? And then you start thinking about things like bananas and apples and how they come pre-wrapped, but in a way which is good for the planet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's an interesting question. Maybe is we're for people who I guess talk about the circular economy a lot because of our jobs. Was there, as you were listening to any of the other ways of introducing the circular economy, maybe start with you on that, Ash, as you've had that reflection, was there one that was particularly more compelling than any of the others, or one that made you think about it in a slightly different way, perhaps?
I always really liked the storytelling aspect of it. I think it's the most, especially if you don't fully understand the circular economy concept and you just need something to grab onto, like telling a story about a light bulb, about one product, really helps introduce you to a lot of different concepts at the same time.
We had a bit of that on stage yesterday with Wolfgang Blau, who's head of Condé Nast International. So a lot of the talks from yesterday, for anyone watching, will be available online in the coming weeks. So do stay tuned for those. But he's obviously head of a very large media organisation. He talked a lot about the need for the need for stories, better communicate at that scale.
Can I ask you a question, Seb?
Yes.
Because you, of course, gave one of the introductions, and yours was more doom and gloom laden and looking at all the problems within the system, and a lot of people do present the case in that way. So what's your take on it?
Yeah,
in terms
I think
of
my reflection, having gone through that process, is actually that it's quite hard to talk about the circular economy when you're only talking about the crisis. That actually, I listed a couple of problems or issues, but I could have gone on for a lot longer, and a lot of people do. I could have spent the whole of the time we have here talking about the challenges with today, and actually what in many ways makes the circular economy story distinct is it does respond to many of the things that I was talking about, but actually is the immediate solutions orientated nature of it. So that was my reflection on doing that exercise, and I guess there's something about a hook. We know that the more plastics than fish in the ocean by 2020 and by 2050 is a powerful way of capturing someone's attention and saying, well, that's clearly in a sentence that makes people pay attention and want to know, well, what's that about, and how can we do something about it, because it's emotive. But actually, as a story, it's quite maybe a bit depressing, or actually a bit, there's something powerful about the solutions focused or the aspirational nature focused, or being able to focus in on a story of change that one didn't have.
But the burning platform, as they would call that approach, is also, it's a very powerful way, because you're delivering shocking facts that make people sit up and take notice and realise that there's a real problem in front of us. And I've presented the circular economy many times by starting in that way. And it's quite a typical way to kick off talk about something where you're going to say, and here's the solution to it.
I think that's the important part, is that you can shock someone, but then you also need to quickly back it up with oh, it's not, I have a solution. You're fine, relax.
Not leave them in this doom and gloom scenario. You need to end it in some other way.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, just for you, Ilma, maybe to start with, it seemed like maybe you've used the light bulb story before?
Or I would say that was the story that most resonated with me when I was listening to various presentations and versions of introducing circular economy, and it was like, oh wow, I actually didn't know that all these companies came together and really sat down and decided that we're going to limit the lifespan of a light bulb. And when you think about it, it's so shocking that they made this decision that then had influence on all of us and on all other industries as well. So I guess that was my entry to what really attracted me to circular economy and how you could present circular economy.
Makes me think a bit about something we also talk about quite a bit, this idea that the economy is not some kind of force of nature, that there are things being designed into it.
Exactly.
And that means obviously that we can redesign it.
Exactly.
Colin, you've obviously done your nature one before. Obviously. What's the reaction been to that?
I did it at the Edinburgh Science Festival,
I
which
will
seemed...
confess to the audience, that was not a sincere question. I know that you did that for the Edinburgh Science Festival.
But doing it at a science festival, of course, makes sense, right? To start in that way, talking about living systems and making that comparison. So, sorry, the question was, what was the reaction, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it went down very well, yeah. Because it was the right audience for that particular beginning, and I think for the other reasons I've given too, I think it's an effective way of quickly getting people up to speed with what we're talking about when we're talking about complex systems. Because complex systems are, of course, complex, and they can be a very difficult thing to introduce, so you make them approachable by using these more intuitive examples.
We've had a question in online from Patricia. Thanks for watching, Patricia. She said that I found the intro thing quite useful, but her challenge is what does she need to include to tell the story of a circular economy? What are the essentials, I guess she's asking. Anyone want to jump on that? Are there certain things you have to tick off if you're talking about trying to describe the circular economy?
I have a couple things that I try and emphasize each time. I mean, obviously it's take, make, waste you start with. I think that's something that captures people, is understanding the linear economy first, and then they understand the line to the circle bit. I also really try and emphasize the role of design for me, because otherwise people don't understand the full picture and ambition of what we're trying to do with the circular economy. And then as much as I can, I also include like stats and figures, not just about how much waste is going to landfill and how much plastic is in the ocean and stuff, but also about underutilized assets and wasted space, because the circular economy is not just about waste going to landfill, it's also waste that's in our economy more generally, so underutilized offices or products not being used enough, that kind of thing.
So the lines of the circle, design, and this notion that waste isn't just a pile of rubbish.
Stuff. Yeah, exactly.
And I would add to that I think it's really great to include examples that actually demonstrate that it's already out there and we just don't think about it. Or let's say, talking about the underutilized assets, that there is an app. If you need a parking space, you can use the app, and then you can just park your car in someone's garage or in someone's parking lot if it's left unused. And it's good for you, and it's much cheaper for you than any standard, let's say, airport parking, and it's good for them because they get some income as well. And it's already out there. We just don't think about it, that it's part of the circular economy, though.
So it's real and it's happening on the ground.
Yeah.
And obviously much of the work of the DIF is actually showcasing some of those examples.
Yeah, I concur. I think getting into case studies is really important, and we found this at the event we were at yesterday, where there were lots of examples on stage of how businesses have gone about doing this, and here's a product you can see, you can touch, and in one case you could taste because we had some beer. But people want to know quite quickly, once they get the concept, right, who's doing this. So you've got to have these examples up your sleeve, don't you think?
Definitely.
Well, thank you very much, Colin, Ashman, Ilma. Thank you so much to the DIF audience for tuning in today. If you're looking for some of the examples or indeed some information about the circular economy, do check out the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's website and thinkdiff.co, where we stream these types of events. That is the end of our day of activity. We are doing, if you haven't seen the news, we are now doing live interactive events at least 4 times a year. The next one is September 10th, 11th and 12th. So make sure you join us then. And then if you want to participate, if you want to showcase your innovation, your idea, Applications to speak at our event in November, which runs November 10th to 11th to 15th, are open. So go to thinkdiff.co and take a look at that and join us in November. Thanks so much for paying attention today and for your questions and comments, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
We need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.